So now that we have some data in our user's database, we can start working on the actual authentication process. So one of the things we're going to do here is this microservice authentication right now. All it's going to do is listen for a post request that has a JSON body with a username and a password. Then it will use our data.models, the user type in there, to check to see if the password and username supplied match what we have in our database, and it will send some response back. And of course, that means we're going to be reading and writing JSON. And in the broker service, we already have this file. In the broker service folder, CMD API, we have the helpers.go. So I can just copy this and paste it into the authentication service as helpers.go. So I'll do that, select all and copy, and go to the CMD API folder for authentication service. Create a new file called helpers.go and paste the contents in there, okay? And that will work just fine. Now we're going to be doing this sort of thing for all of our microservices, or at least for many of them. And it may be something that you want to actually extract into its own package. And if you're interested in doing that, I actually have a link to this in the course resources for this lecture. I extracted that functionality plus the ability to generate a random string to a package called tsolver toolbox. And there's a link to this in the course resources. It's dead simple. It's very, very easy to make this a reusable package. And all I would do is, as you see here under installation, go get this file and use it like this. Create a variable called tools of type toolbox.tools, and then I have access to all of the methods in there. And if you look at the tools.go, I actually have I have the type for JSON response that I can import where I need to use it. And I have read JSON, write JSON, error JSON, and then I have this random string. And the only difference, of course, is that each of these three functions related to JSON, they're exported. They start with a capital letter. So you can do that if you want to, but for the sake of simplicity in this course, I'll just copy and paste for now. So let's go back to our code. I now have this available to me. So now let's go back to our routes file. I'll close the broker service folder. Let's go back to our routes file and set up a route to a handler that doesn't exist yet. Okay? So first of all, I'll put in that heartbeat one. I might as well. mux.use, and I'm going to use middleware dot heartbeat right there, and I'll just pass it /ping. I may never use this, but it's there if I need it. Okay, and again, that's just a way of to make sure that this service is still responding to network requests. Now I'll create a new route, mux.post. It'll be a post request, and it's going to be /authenticate, and it will go to a handler that doesn't exist yet. app.authenticate seems appropriate. Okay, so we need to go make that handler. So I'll create a new file in the CMD API folder of the authentication service folder. A new file called handlers.go. Okay? And it's a very simple handler, package main. And I'll create, first of all, a function with the receiver of app pointer to config, and I'll call it authenticate. And it requires a response writer right there, and a pointer to a request, like all handlers do. Okay, so first of all, let's declare a variable that has the same tags that we're going to receive in the JSON. And I'm going to assume that the JSON payload is just going to be a very simple JSON file with an email and a password. So I'll declare a variable. I'll call it request payload. And it's a struct, which I have to spell right. And it will have email of type string. And in JSON, that's called email. And it will have password. Also a string. And in JSON, that will be called, not surprisingly, password. Okay, that's what I'm going to unmarshal my data into. Now, I'll check for an error when I call from app in the helpers file, and I want to call read JSON. And that requires the response writer, the request, and I'm going to read it into request payload. And I'll check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, then I'll call app.errorJSON, and I'll give that W and the error, and I'll specify http.say status bad request. bad request right there. And I'll return because I can't go any further. But if I get past that, now I want to validate the user against the database. And that's dead simple at this point. I'll declare a variable user and check for an error when I call app.models.user.getByEmail. And the email is just request payload right there, .email. And again, we'll check for an error. So I'll copy this, but I'll change the error message. So I'll copy this, paste it in here, and I'll change the error to say errors.new invalid credentials. I don't want to give them too much information in case someone's trying to get in there. And it didn't import errors for me, but I can do that. Errors, and then close this off with a closing parentheses. That's better. Okay, so now I have the user. If I get past that, I was able to get the user by email. So now I just validate the password. So I'll declare a variable valid, and that will be a Boolean, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. And error, they come from user, that variable I just got on line 22, dot password matches. And that requires one parameter, request payload dot password. Okay, and again, I'll check for an error, and it's a little repetitive, but I'll copy and paste this. Again, I'm going to give them the same error message. I don't want them to know whether it's the username or the password invalid in case somebody's trying to hack into the system. Okay? And the other thing I'll change here, of course, is this if statement. I don't want to check to see if it's just an error. I'll say if error is not equal to nil or not valid. Okay? So I might have no error from this request, but this is set to false. So in this case, I'm going to say if there's an error in the request, or if I got false back as my response, then you can't log in. Otherwise, I'll send back the necessary information. So I'll set a variable payload, and I'll make that assign the value of type JSON response. And we'll say the error is false because there's no error. Everything happened as expected. And the message, I'll make that something like format.sprintf, and I'll say logged in, better spell it right, in user %s, and the substitution will be user.email. So I have that. And I'm also going to put in some data, and the data will actually be our user. Okay? And I just write this out as JSON. And now that's as easy as saying app.writeJSON. And I write using W with the http.statusAccepted, or any status that you think is valid, and payload. So now, this should be usable. If we did everything right, and I think we did, we should be able to now go and modify our front-end application to make a request to the broker. And the next step, of course, is to have that broker receive that request, fire off the request to this service, and then send a response back to the user. Okay? So we'll get started on that in the next lecture.